Hi, I'm Scott Usher. I'm the creative director at Haven Light Publishing, and this is Haven Light Artist Spotlight. We are here in the studio today with Brandon Gonzales. Brandon, thanks for coming in today.
It's good to be here, Scott. Thank you.
I'm actually extra excited to have you here today because one of the things I just realized about you for doing my homework is you were trained at the Art Center of Design in California.
That is correct, yeah.
If you've been in the art business for a long time, especially the more realistic type art business, Art Center has produced some of the most influential artists in realistic art. I'm sure it goes back to the 50s, but I'll just say in my awareness of things from the 70s through today, it was an incredible place to get an art education.
Absolutely, yeah, and that's what kind of influenced me to go there. You know, my path led me to a bunch of different schools, but as I kind of heading in the traditional route was kind of my first kind of goal and direction, and then got exposure to digital work, digital painting, and what that could kind of be, and how that could even emulate and be similar to traditional work, how it's like concept work and concept design, and then looking at a lot of these artists that I liked and admired, traditional and digital, they all came from Art Center, so that's kind of what drew me to there in the first place, and then I went there and kind of headed down that path as well.
One of the things that I've noticed through the years is that Art Center was such a dominant player in training for what was the realistic style of painting because they had a classically based program.
Sure.
You learned how to draw. From drawing, you learned how to paint. You know, like I say, very classical path. Amazingly, Utah kind of really slid into the space that Art Center used to be dominant in. And that you'd have BYU and UVU and U of U, and then you've got to throw in it was Rick's before, but now BYU Idaho, that the traditional art training program kind of shifted here and Art Center moved away from it.
Yeah, definitely kind of has changed their motives and their kind of direction. I loved Art Center. I definitely, like you said, definitely helped me to develop those foundational skills, drawing technical abilities that have kind of influenced me to today.
Yeah.
But yeah.
And, you talk about that you had this digital training and everything like that. You went on to be a matte painter.
Yes.
What films did you work on?
I've worked on a lot of films and even TV commercials. Right out of school, my first film was Alvin and the Chipmunks Chipwrecked. And so that was kind of my first jump right into working in the industry, in the entertainment industry, as a conceptual matte painter. And then from there, I went to work on 42, Hansel and Gretel, Witch Hunters, and then just kind of Prometheus.
So a matte painter in 42, somebody would know what you did because they'd be looking at scene. I know what you did. I'd say you'd be looking at scene X, and what would you have put into scene X?
So it's mostly the backgrounds, right? In 42 specifically, all those stadiums don't exist anymore. They've all been torn down, and so they filmed on a baseball field, and then what we would do as a matte painter come in and take our we had a 3D modeler that built the stadiums to scale, and then we took that 3D model and photography that was black and white photography, and then we would create a matte painting of what it would look like, or what it was looking like at that time. Billboards, the buildings, and so it was really fun and challenging in that we're trying to match historically what was there, using that black and white photography, and then having some artistic freedom to kind of with color and everything.
Were you doing traditional paintings or were you doing digital work?
All digital. Yeah,
all digital
work.
There used to be real traditional paths that people would take out of art school, of illustration, where they could really go out and hone their skills and stuff like that. And having an opportunity to come out of Art Center in LA and then be working on, commercial work there. Did you do games and stuff too, or is it mostly more the entertainment industry?
Mostly videos, movies, films, feature films, and TV. I also, for a period of time, worked on attractions, theme parks as well. So going back to Art Center, I kind of joined the program with entertainment design, which is kind of at the time was a newish, right? Starting to grow and develop, and it kind of became like the draw to the school for while I was there anyway. And the education was just great because it was like we were learning how to become, product designers, vehicle designers, character designers, environment designers, costume designers, and doing everything, learning how to do it all, because for concept design, you need to do it all. So it was like we got this overview of like all the different classes and stuff from Art Center and the strengths that they have, and kind of created it into one program that gave you experience to all of it. So that was kind of my background. So with that, it gave me a lot of skills and abilities that it gave me a flexibility to do different things, right? Yep. So right out of school, I wanted to do be a concept artist.
Yep.
Towards the end, then I kind of got exposed to matte painting and what that meant, and it kind of came natural to me to be able to manipulate photos in a realistic way, and do it for feature film. So I kind of jumped into there and did that for a while, and then as projects end and there's between time, networking and connections that I've made, I ended up joining ThinkWell and working with them for several months, working on theme parks and attractions. And so it was just kind of amazing that I was able to translate over in a completely different industry, but it worked out really well. And it was really fun working on these theme parks and stuff. So
all along keeping your painting skills, your physical painting skills, in line with what you were doing digitally.
To some degree, yeah. Like I kind of shifted digital for a lot to kind of really strengthen those skills. But, I loved taking my sketchbook, and I would do little, at lunchtime, watercolor studies and stuff around where we were eating. And so, yeah, I kind of slowly kept that up there. And then eventually we decided to go back to school for grad school. And that's where I really brought them back up to speed.
So with all the work you're doing digitally, the first time I saw a couple of your paintings, especially I'd say probably more than anything because of the colors, somebody said to me, "Oh, those are paintings, like physical paintings." And I was surprised and pleased because it seems like your palette is really punchy and feels almost digital. Do you think there's any influence in there, or is this just how you see the world?
I definitely think that like my experience as a matte painter and concept artist working in the digital has influenced it. My palette, I've been keeping it really simple, kind of like a warm and cool version of the primaries, and been mixing it. And so having that limited palette, it just kind of becomes what I do and how I see things and what I want to say. I've slowly kind of opened up that color palette a little bit, but I felt like that I've been able to communicate everything that I've wanted to with that limitation within that palette.
It's funny. I look at a piece like Garden Witness, which is just kind of pow.
Yeah.
And I don't feel a sense of limitation at all. I mean, you're saying limited, and I'm trying to process, why is this limited? Explain again, why is this limited? Because you're just using, I don't want to say 4 colors, but you're just using 4 colors? What is it?
Yeah, the limitation is just like I do have like a warm, cool version, so it's 6, 7 colors.
Okay.
And so I'm just using red, yellow, blue, but I'm using warm and cool of a yellow, warm, cool of a red, warm, cool of a blue, and black and some white and grays, and that's kind of it. With that painting specifically, I wanted it to be really bright and colorful, right? The springtime, that's kind of one thing that I associate or feel that is kind of iconic with spring, just the flowers. Things are coming alive, and the color and the vibrancy. And so that's what I really wanted to go for specifically in that painting. So, yeah.
Yeah. No, like I say, it's got a ton of energy. Is there anything that you can do when you're painting that puts energy into a piece that you can or can't do when you're digitally painting, when you're physically painting, that you can or can't do when you're painting in another fashion?
So digital, especially like how I paint with using gouache. I do paint with oil too, but these paintings are all kind of with gouache, and that was kind of my big push because of wanting to really I'm passionate about that. But digital, yeah, it's very similar. Like you can put the marks down, but with digital, you can manipulate it. You can keep manipulating it, right? You can be blending it and smearing it. And traditional, it's a little, quite have that control. But with gouache specifically, what I've liked is like it's helped me to kind of be really bold with my brush stroke, like because it dries pretty quick, but it's still versatile enough where I feel like I have control and I can just like put a mark down, and it has that energy that I want it to, and it's there. And I can keep blending it and working things, but I liked how I can capture that brush stroke, and so. The one thing that's to answer your question a little bit more clearly is, with a brush, I can rotate the brush in different angles and get a variety of marks and texture. Whereas digital, you don't get quite as much control, right? You can get variety in your brush stroke depending on the dynamics of that brush, but as doing it traditionally, I can feel it, I can control it, I can kind of, get a thin line, a big stroke or whatever.
Not that you're painting like Jackson Pollock, but it just seems like when you're on an easel or something like that, you have a little more opportunity to give it that flick, give it that thing that says, ooh, and I've spilt something too.
Yeah, yeah, and you can see like sometimes there's a little flicking and things and stuff on there, and happy accidents, I guess you could say, that kind of like strengthen that. So yeah.
And sidebar, one of the things that again that you told me earlier that I find intriguing is you're actually working with and have worked with and taught digital painters how to transition over to painting.
Today's episode is brought to you by Haven Light, the premier religious art dealer with curated collections to help you find your Jesus and invite more light into your home. If you've been looking for a piece of religious art, shop our curated collections at the link in the description below and use code PODCAST20 for 20% off of your order. Let's get back to today's episode.
Yes. Yeah.
And you chose gouache again because blank.
Yeah, well, so I learned gouache in school and for color theory, kind of teaching that. And so I learned it, and how they taught it was just kind of different than how I approached it. But I learned it that way, put it on the shelf for a while, and then had a kind of a career digitally. Came back to grad school, created a hypothetical, my favorite ideal class to teach, which was a landscape painting class. And I kind of geared it around oil because that was kind of my focus at the time. They liked my idea, and they said, "Would you teach it for us?" And then knowing my background as a matte painter concept artist, and knowing the digital, they said, "Can you teach it towards our game design students, and maybe use gouache?" Because I think they were learning gouache as well in one of their earlier classes. And I'm like, "Yeah, let's do it." And so that was the opportunity I had to revisit gouache and kind of shift the curriculum from like an oil painting to gouache, and jump in full on and make it happen. So that was an opportunity was presented, and I shifted and decided to embrace it, and I loved it, and I'm glad that I did and never looked back.
What's the biggest thing that a digital artist, you've just given them a paintbrush, you give them a set of paint, what's the biggest thing they go, "Oh, I'm having so much trouble transitioning to X"? What's the biggest trouble they have?
Well, if they have, sometimes it might be just like the medium itself, kind of learning the physical attributes of it, the water to paint ratio, and then the mixing of colors. Mixing this color with that color, and how to kind of make it more neutral, value control. Like it's a little bit much more methodical, and has to be approached a little bit more methodical, because like with digital, if your values are off or contrast, you can easily shift it and change that around. Whereas painting, like you've got to change it completely, Yeah. So there's a little bit more of like a process that needs to be approached into doing a painting. And so I kind of would walk them through that process. First, just eliminate color all the way and just focus on value. That's one way to kind of like, okay, I can manage one thing at once, and let's get the values right, because that's most important. And then after that, then we can slowly introduce color and understand relationships with that color and how they work in as a whole and together next to each other, and then slowly saturate the palettes to where now you can kind of capture anything under the sun and have complete control and freedom to do what you want.
it seems like on one hand, digital is saying, wow, you can make any mistake you want because we can clean it up really easy. But you have the ability for more sense of impulsivity with regular painting or not, you know.
Sure. I could see that. To some degree, I think that, like, yes, you have more control with digital, and I think that maybe you could overwork things. But the same thing with art, like with traditional, if you keep noodling something, it gets muddy, it gets overworked. So I guess you can go too far with that as well, but just needs that control.
Getting into the Christian theme as opposed to what you were doing in the entertainment business or landscape.
Yeah.
Had you been looking to do it? You've been doing it all along? Has this been kind of like, I'm kind of coming home and I want to do a little bit of this? How did you move into the Christian thing?
Yeah. So digital and concept has been like the primary focus, right? And with matte painting, you know, it's very heavily environment, right? And then I started doing plein air painting, which is, again, mostly environment, oil painting, and was doing that. Then the gouache, I started doing that the same way. But then, and I love gouache. I love because of how I can get that expressive brushstroke and that energy that I feel. And I really wanted to push it and see what other people thought, if they liked it or if they would be receptive to it or not. So I put oil aside and was like, let's swing for the fences with this one. Let's see how people react.
You're treating gouache a lot like oils. You're getting colors, and I'm used to gouache being more watercolory.
Yeah.
And you're getting a lot more oil out of gouache. And there's Paul Landry, a guy that was a floral fella back east. You know, there's all these folks that, of course, I've seen colorful gouache.
Yeah.
But I'll just sit there and say, yours is really coming across oily.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was presented an opportunity with Esther Kandari and at the time Written Vision, where they wanted me to do a small show. And she kind of, I wanted it Christian themed, and she let me know kind of what the other artists would be doing at the time. And I wanted to kind of complement that. And so my idea was to do, again, more environment based, but kind of have it, here's a scene of where perhaps Christ was baptized, something like that. So it was not like a lot of figurative work per se, but more like, this is what it could have been like, kind of like approaching like a concept artist in a way. I did that. I did several paintings. It just didn't feel right. It didn't feel compelling enough in the way that I wanted it to, and the way that I felt that I could communicate it. So then I said, you know what? It needs to have figurative work. It needs to have some figures in it. I think, a landscape can be beautiful, and I love landscapes, but when there's a figure in there, all of a sudden, like we look at that, and we can resonate with that figure, and we look at it. And so I started putting some figures in there, and then as I started doing that, the story was starting to come alive. And so that's when I was like, this is what I need to do. I need to put figures in these. I need to tell the story. And so that's what I did. As I started, let's put all the figures in these environments, and let's make them do it. Let's go all the way in.
And I think that's another defining thing in what you're putting together, because a lot of the stuff, here's Christ in a location, a lot of paintings, and then here's everything else that's around him. In your paintings, you got to kind of find them.
Yeah.
You've got to, look twice. I mean, it's not like you're looking that hard, but you're really creating a scene. Like, say you are doing concept, you're really creating a scene in which he did what he did.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, like, my background has influenced it heavily, right? Like, I kind of think of, you have your traditional scene with Christ in the middle, like what you would think, but and even in a film, you would see that. But I like to see, like, maybe if we rewind the film a little bit, just moments before as he's approaching, or before the event that's significant happens. Let's kind of play with, like,
It's N.C. Wyeth.
When
I paint between the lines.
Yeah. So that was kind of my thing. I was like, I can tell a different story, because all these scenes have been painted before by great artists and stuff. So my kind of idea was like, let's tell the story a little differently, and maybe time is part of that, right? I've little bit before or after or something. So
Tell me about healing coming.
yeah, I love this one. I think that like a lot of people resonate with it, right? And I love marketplaces. I love where there's a lot of people, colors, textures, and things. So that was kind of a scene that I really wanted to do. And so with this woman with the issue of blood and, all of her pain and suffering that she's seen in her life, here comes Christ coming through the marketplace, coming towards her. And in this scene, like I wanted to see that she doesn't even know that he's coming yet. And she's kind of focused in on her pain, everything that she's gone through, everything up to that point, and she doesn't realize yet that like the person that's going to heal
her
him.
down in the lower, yep,
and then
the lower left.
Christ is coming through the market, and then that's when she, sees the way out, like that she could be healed. He's the way, and so, there's pictures of her touching it, and I wanted to get before then, like before she doesn't have hope yet. She doesn't see that like there's a light at the end of the tunnel, but it's there, it's coming. So
nice.
Yeah.
I love the arch in this piece. Where'd you find the arch? It's a great thing to be putting in.
Yeah. So a lot of this process, like, is, again, when I started doing this, I wasn't really familiar at all with Jerusalem and the streets and what it was like. So a lot of this stuff came with doing research of images and photography, other artists and paintings. And then I've also started to embrace like using all the tools possible from my experience as a map painter and concept artist. And then with AI coming out, like using AI to kind of generate assets or ideas or possibilities. And so that's kind of been a tool that I've embraced to kind of help flesh out some of these ideas that I've wanted. With the archway, like I've seen several paintings and like not to say Bouguereau, but like the classical artists that have that technical skill, I've seen like they do some of those arches, and I was like, why not? Let's kind of do something like that. And so this is not a story that's not directly from the Bible, but Christ went around through the streets, he would heal people, and this is another thing. Like, so this is kind of like the female version, the male version of someone also needing help, needing to be healed, and Christ coming there to do it. So
in this case, fella in the lower left-hand corner again, Christ is going to interact with him and healing with him?
Yeah,
okay.
that was the idea, yeah. Because, just in the composition itself, we see Christ. I wanted to do that contrast there. And then we just kind of look back and forth because he's by himself. He stands out. Why is he there? What's going on? And so your mind starts to kind of fill in the gaps or ask questions of what's why, what's going on. So
is there anything different? And I'm sure it's just the space. I don't know an answer to a question like that. But if you think about a director framing a scene versus how an artist would frame a scene, you kind of got a single frame, and the director has the opportunity to think, is there any difference? Is it the same? I mean, is it the format? You've been in the space. I'm just curious.
Yeah, I feel that it's probably similar. Maybe like the way we think or approach it might be a little bit different, but yeah, I kind of picture like a frame. Like if this was the camera, thinking of like, the positioning of the camera, how high or low, how that affects the feeling of what we're going for, or what I'm wanting to kind of convey, the emotional feeling, the what I want to see, and even the perspective. Do a 1, 2, 3 point perspective. What would make more sense in this scene? So I'm kind of thumbnailing this out small to kind of like for me to just figure out what communicates it more clearly with my intention, right? So these little thumbnails I'll do to kind of figure that out.
Yep. Yeah. It seems like you would have more time to be intricate in your design than a director would, because the director's just going to kind of come and go.
Right.
You know, your scene's moving and everything's going to happen. It just seems like you could design something far more intricate in allowing someone to move through and discover a painting over what a director has the chance to do.
Sure.
You know?
Yeah, I think...
It's an observation.
Yeah.
No right or wrong answer.
And with that, like I'm wanting to, you know, this is kind of talking about the future of me approaching doing these paintings and stuff, and how I want to kind of plan them out is start building 3D and using 3D assets into it, so I can kind of, in a way, some respect, art direct it myself. Like build those assets simply, control the lighting, and then I have maybe set the stage, and now it's and now I can use that as another tool.
Yeah.
So.
Which they've been doing since the onset of time, you know.
Yeah.
I can tell you, you know, again, like these old illustrators, fellas like Tom Lovell and Harold von Schmidt, and, you know, these are the guys that would work for National Geographic. They build these intricate models of whatever it was going to be that, you know, National Geographic wanted them to paint because you could never get a photograph of it. And, yeah, that was how they go about it. There was no 3D modeling. There wasn't Google to give you a thing or something like that. They're like, okay, I'm just going to build this set.
Yeah.
You know, and that's how you go about it. So I said, what's old is new. There's nothing different. You might be able to do 3D modeling as on a computer as opposed to having to build out your set, but it's the same game.
Yeah.
You know.
Yep.
So most of the pieces that people are seeing from you at this point in time are from the show you did at Written Vision before.
Yes.
The Wiseman's Journey was probably the most physically larger piece you did at the show.
Yes, one of
You're
them.
working small. You do a lot of things small. Why?
Well, with that show specifically, I had, you know, limited amount of time to do it.
Very practical, right?
So because of that limitations, like I had to keep it small to and also I'm kind of exploring, trying to figure out how it is I want to do it and what I want to say. So they were small, right? I wanted, because of that, I had to keep it small so I wouldn't have one piece. I wanted a bunch. And I'm, you know, I have another show coming up in December, and I plan on kind of doing the same thing. But now that I have more time, that's going to allow me to go do bigger pieces. And I have been slowly building up and doing bigger pieces for other shows now that I have time to do it. I'm wanting to keep going bigger, and the smaller ones. The smaller ones are fun because, you know, you can be pretty quick with those and kind of figure out a lot of things, you know. And artists sometimes will often do a lot of smaller paintings for the big paintings. You know, they're working at a lot of the color, composition, mood, and things at those levels because it's so quick to do that. Then when they move on to the big one, they've solved a lot of the problems that they face. So it's faster that way.
Cool. You have such an interesting background. And like I say, one of the neatest things, we're lucky we get to see a lot of art. But sometimes when you get to see a lot of art, you start seeing a lot of the same art. And what you're doing, let's say your palette, how you're framing out what you're doing, the design that you're putting into the work that you're doing, it's really fresh. And it's just a really neat and different feel to what you're doing. And it's really fun when you get to bump into something that is different than everything else you're seeing every day.
Thank you. I think that's a huge compliment, and that's what I'm wanting to go for. Like I want to be able to tell something in a different way, right? Like I think a lot of the images of Christ and his story and things have been painted beautifully by artists for centuries. I just want to try to see, like, how can I tell it differently and have it even be more personal and relatable and relevant to us as individuals and people. So
I'm Scott Usher. I'm the creative director at Havenlight, and this has been Havenlight Artist Spotlight with Brandon Gonzales. Thanks for coming in today.
thank you.